Weber mentioned that we're not just throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks. And I said that in my plenary talk this morning also, that I think for a long time our movement was doing that with behavioral change, especially with dietary campaign, not campaigns, they're not campaigns, that's my point, but with efforts to change people's diets, is we just talk and kind of hope that some of it, resonates with people, that some of it sticks. And that, I think, was necessary for a while, but now we have a lot of really good tools to kind of know what sticks and know what works. And so it's time for us to move past just throwing out every message that's ever occurred to us and actually setting some measurable goals on how we are going to save the lives of animals with behavioral change. We don't just want vegans for the sake of veganism. We want veganism because we want to save the lives of animals. And so how are we going to maximize our time when we're reaching individuals to save the most number of animals? And so with that, I think we need to have an internal goal separate from our external goal. And our internal goal needs to be the number of animals saved. We need to find some formula that we trust to some degree that will tell us how many animals are saved. So I'm trying not to just use farms campaigns because I want to make this apply to everyone, but I'm going to stick with what I know. So when I talk about vegan diets, please feel free to, in your mind, translate this to anti-fur campaigns, anti-circus, whatever you work on. I don't just want to focus on farmed animals, but sticking with what I know. We, with our 10 Billion Lives tour and the pay-per-view campaign, where we pay people $1 to watch a 4-minute video, and we know right now that 84% of those people pledge to eat more vegan food afterward, and we've done a lot of follow-up surveys and been able to calculate that we are pretty confident that for every average person that views the video on site, 10 animals are spared per year because of dietary change. Now that's average, so some people go fully vegan, some people do nothing, but we believe that an average of 10 animals are spared per person that we reach, and per right person that we reach. And I'm gonna get into reaching the right people a little bit later. And so our internal goal is not number of people reached, it's number of animals spared. That's how we think internally at the office. We think of how many animals are we gonna spare with this next leg of the tour on the 10 Billion Lives tour, with this next round of videos we put on the internet, or this next, any campaign that we do to reach people. The internal goal is how many animals are spared. The external goal to get our volunteers motivated is the number of people we're gonna reach. So the internal goal and external goal are slightly different, but they're correlated because the number of people reached is the number of animals spared if you do your advocacy efforts correctly. So I just want us to think in terms of goals. We're not just trying to reach people. We should know approximately how many people we're trying to reach. Even if it's something as simple as leafleting, we can still say, I'm gonna go out today and give out 500 leaflets. And if you don't do 500, you do 400, that's fine. You still reached 400 people, which is great. But if you set a goal for yourself, especially with a team of people, the 10 of us are gonna go out and reach 5,000 people, then you can check in with each other, find out how many you've reached that day each, and find a way to reevaluate and get yourself up to that goal. And that's just with a single day, but we can do this over the course of months and years as well. So, let's see, I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself here. So yeah, the external goal should be something that people can be part of and feel proud of. And this is actually really, really easy with outreach campaigns. So I don't think that outreach campaigns are inherently better or worse than campaigns targeted to organizations or corporations or the government. But one thing that I do think is easier and better about outreach campaigns is that we don't need to achieve our entire goal to achieve our goal. So if we set out, like with Meat Out, we set out 2 years ago, the first time we set this goal, to reach 20,000 people with free vegan food. That was our goal. So we mobilized volunteers across the country and got some of them to pledge to get 50 food samples out, some of them to pledge to get 500 food samples out, with the total combined goal of getting 20,000 food samples out. But what makes outreach campaigns really cool is if we had only gotten 15,000 food samples out, it wouldn't have mattered that we didn't reach our goal. That goal was really just a way of mobilizing people and getting them to pledge to get a certain amount of food samples out. But 15,000 food samples is 15,000 people reached, whether or not we reached 20,000 or not. Sometimes with other campaigns, it's not as true. If you need to get 20,000 signatures and you got 19,099 signatures, it's almost as if you got none. In some ways, it's all, that work did not necessarily lead to what you want. But the great thing about outreach campaigns is you can get more or less, and it almost doesn't, it matters, but it only matters as much as the people that you reached. And it also means that every individual piece mattered in of itself. So if we had 10 groups committed to give out vegan food samples and 2 of them dropped the ball, That sucks for those 2 cities that didn't get any food samples out, but those other 8 people's groups, it was not in vain. They still did their city just as well as they would have, whether those 2 cities came through or not. So I think that is one big strength of outreach campaigns, and that's the only time in this talk that I'm gonna plug for outreach campaigns as being better or worse than campaigns targeted against businesses. But I do think that is something that I find really powerful, especially for people new to taking part in campaigns. So someone who's been in it for a while longer and is okay with an occasional defeat, occasionally not winning a campaign, that's great. Work on some, corporate governmental campaigns. But if you're new to taking part in campaigns, I find that morale is a lot higher when you know that even if you fell a little bit short, that falling short didn't have necessarily a major effect, and you can just next time, reach even more people. The goals should be challengeable, but achievable. And I think Deborah kind of talked about this, but I call it staying in the yellow. And it was a term that I actually got from my bass guitar teacher in high school, and it's been so useful that I use it in everything in my life. And basically, as we get better and better at what we do, the green gets longer. If you think of our life as a scale of things we can do and things we can't do, the better we do in our lives, the longer and longer the green gets, and the shorter and shorter that red gets. But the yellow is always about this big, and it just moves along and moves along and moves along. So as we find that we can achieve goals like this, we move up to the next round of them, but it's still the yellow, because the yellow just nudged over. We achieve this goal, the yellow nudged over one more time, but we can always stay in the yellow because we're wasting our time trying to achieve goals that are too hard for us, and we're not maximizing our effectiveness for saving animals' lives if we try to achieve goals that are too easy for us. So I think we should really always think of this concept of staying in the yellow, goals that are challenging enough that we know we're using our resources and time wisely, but not so challenging that we're gonna burn out and have failure and have used our time for no good reason. So now we know we want to reach people, we want to reach X number of people and save X number of animals. I think the next big obvious question is who to reach and how to reach them. That's critical. We need to find the perfect target audience, and we need to reach them in a way that is meaningful to them and resonates with them. And so a lot of groups talk about this, but I think this is pretty obvious. With a lot of the work that we do, reaching young people is probably the best audience we can do, especially with dietary change. Young people have a lot longer to live, so their veganism is gonna save more animals. They haven't had their habits ingrained in them as long, so that it's easier for them to change. They are usually in a phase of kind of change and rebellion, so they're open to another change, and they're more likely to spread what they're doing to their friends. So that is 4 massive reasons, in my opinion, to work largely with young people. That's I think, really the critical audience. And then the next question, of course, would be what kind of message do we use to reach these people? And obviously, at certain points using the, again, back to dietary change, but please apply this to any efforts you do. I'm not trying to keep this about farmed animals. But on dietary change, you can use the health message, the environmental message. I really have found, and this might be kind of counterintuitive to some of you, that the animal message works better 90-something% of the time, especially with young people. Young people, they don't want to become less healthy, but they don't usually care that much about becoming more healthy either, to be honest. And they certainly care about the environment, but they've heard so many different ways they can affect the environment. Light bulbs, driving, the eating organic. There's so many different things they've heard. But the message of animal cruelty is very intuitive for young people especially when we talk about animals that they've related to. And this next part applies to fur, vivisection, circuses, anything. If we start out the outreach message by getting them to talk about animals. So we don't just tell them what our message is, but we talk to them and ask them to tell us about the animals they know. Every talk that I give to high schools and colleges, the first thing I do before I even say my name is I ask for a show of hands of how many people in that room think it's morally acceptable to kick a dog in the face for pleasure. And I've reached thousands of students, and only once or twice has anyone ever raised their hand. So it sets the pace, or sets the tone right there for the whole room agreeing with me, and makes everything else I say that much more meaningful, because everyone in the room, except for that occasional 1 or 2 jerks, already now agrees on something basic. And I don't tell them why it's not okay. I ask someone. I say, can someone please raise their hand, tell me why that's not okay? And everyone kind of looks around like I'm the idiot, like, what does this guy think? Well, why would that be okay? And I say, I'm not even going to move on until one person raise your hand and tell me. And then that one person finally will say, because it's wrong to cause unnecessary suffering to an animal? And I say, bingo. Does everyone in this room agree that causing unnecessary suffering to animals is wrong? And every single person raises their hand. And now we're on this amazing platform to talk about animal cruelty, where every single person has now already agreed with me that harming animals without a good reason is wrong. So once I prove to them that raising animals for food harms animals, and once I demonstrate that we don't need to do it, every person in the room has basically agreed with me that taking a step towards veganism is a good, logical, and morally correct thing to do. So that's a little bit about who to reach and how to reach them, or what message to use to reach them. I think another critical piece of this is how do we find those right people to reach? How do we get to those people? And this applies, again, to any area of animal abuse and also to any age range. What I've found works super, super well is to find what I call captive audiences. And sometimes the way I word this is finding bored people. Basically, finding situations where where talking to you is the most interesting thing they can do. So if you're at a festival and you know that everyone wants to talk with everyone, that basically counts, because talking to you is equally interesting as talking to someone else. If you do something like you're at a big rock concert and obviously there's something more interesting, which is the rock concert, that's when you need a little gimmick, like to pay you $1 to watch a video, because now out of nowhere, just the weirdness of why are they gonna give me $1 to watch a video, just for those few minutes has made us more interesting than the bands on the stage who are playing all day long and gonna keep going after this 4 minutes is done. And I found that classroom talks are really the best thing to do this with, or anything on a campus, because anytime you go onto a campus, anything you do that breaks up their normal routine is more interesting than what they were going to do otherwise. Anything you say, basically, is more interesting than what their day-to-day routine that they're sick of and probably don't even want to be on that campus, right? So whether you go into their classroom or reach them while they're walking away from class, almost anything you say on a campus is more interesting than what they're otherwise going to be doing. And I find that really critical is finding ways to reach people when they don't want to leave the interaction. If they want to leave the interaction, you're wasting your time, because they're going to look for ways to disprove you and get the hell out of there. You want to find ways to reach people when they don't want to leave that interaction. And the way to do that is find ways to reach them when you're more interesting than anything else they could be doing in that period of time that you've allotted. And speaking of allotting a period of time, there is a serious cost-benefit analysis that we're always going to have to do with outreach campaigns on how many people to reach versus how much time that we spend with those people. That's going to dictate how many animals are spared. On the extreme that would never be, useful at all, if we were to take little tiny business cards that said "Go Vegan" and dump them everywhere, we would reach a lot of people in a very short amount of time. But the amount of time would be so short and meaningless, because all they would see is a message that doesn't matter to them, that it wouldn't do any good. On the flip side, we could spend 10 years trying to get our mom to go vegan, and we've done the exact opposite. We've spent way too much time on one person who may or may not even be receptive to that message, and in that time we could have reached so many more people. So the perfect point of time versus number of people to reach is somewhere between everyone with a business card that says "Go Vegan" and your stubborn mom over the course of 10 years. And I can't tell you what that perfect amount of time is, because it depends on the demographic you're reaching. It depends on the campaign you're reaching them on. You might find that on one issue, it's so intuitive that spending 8 seconds per person and reaching a hell of a lot of people is the perfect strategy, the perfect way to do it. That 8 seconds maximizes the benefit for animals. You might find that on another cause, though, the opposite is true, that the issue is a little more complex. It takes some nuance, but maybe you don't need every single person to care. You just need enough people to care to kind of get, a tipping point to go. And in that case, you might find that, reaching way fewer people with a lot longer of a correspondence might be more meaningful in that case. Do you know how long I've been talking for, Laurel? What time is it? Does someone know? 10 more minutes for the whole session? Okay, then I'm going to wrap up in about 2 minutes and give us almost 10 minutes for Q&A then. So the last thing is assessing what we've been doing. And this is really critical, and it seems a little harder with outreach campaigns. If you want a corporation to change their practice and they did it. There's your assessment, right? I mean, you can assess if it took longer than it should have, if you made any media, mistakes, but in general, with that kind of campaign, your result is reached and you know if you did a good job or not. With outreach campaigns, it's a little bit harder. I strongly recommend one of two things. Either follow-up surveys with an incentive for those who didn't like what you said to also respond. If you send follow-up surveys blindly, only the ones that agreed with you respond, you don't get any meaningful results out of that. But if you have some mechanism in place to know that you're getting a pretty much equal percentage of those who liked and disliked what you said to respond, that's gonna give you a really good idea of whether your outreach is actually creating the meaningful change that you want it to. And the other way is just to use tried and true formulas. So I'm not gonna do a big plug again for farms campaigns, but with the pay-per-view campaign, we already know that 80% of people who see the video and go through our follow-up protocols make changes to their diet. So if you feel like you don't have the resources to plan your own massive outreach campaigns and to do your own follow-up, then maybe join a campaign that you trust and do that one in your local community, and you can basically use a formula that you already believe is getting the follow-up and analysis afterward that it needs. So with that, let's open it up to some questions, huh? Oh, thank you. That might work when we share that. So all right, let's just put that between us and then we can share it.
Come on up to the microphone, please.
Or maybe to not be sitting in weird, maybe you want to take that mic and I'll just pick this one up and use this. All right.
Hi.
Hey, Brian.
Hi, I'm with Stop UBC Animal Research up in Vancouver, BC. And we have probably a unique problem. We started out with 35 people 2 years ago, and now we have more than 600. And the problem that's developed from that is it's a very diverse group, from high school students to a 90-year-old. And there's some cultural clashes from that. We have pro-life people, we have pro-choice advocates, we have anarchists, we have business leaders, and there's a certain segment of the group that sort of wants us to recognize intersections of oppression and have a litmus test politically. They want us to purge all pro-lifers from the group. Anyone who's conservative, anybody who wants to work with the police or city officials to get permits. So that segment of the group is upset that sometimes we do cooperate with the police, or we get permits, or we allow non-vegans to be members of the group, we allow pro-life members to be members of the group, and they feel that's very antithetical to their political beliefs. What do you do with a situation like that?
Is that microphone working, by the way? It didn't sound like it was, huh? Or
Yeah, okay.
it was? Okay.
I mean, first of all, just let me say, like, anytime I hear groups talking about purging members, I gotta believe you're going down a bad path. That's, I think it's critically important for groups from the outset, and if it's too late from the outset, then as soon as possible, have a group-wide retreat where everybody is invited, and figure out what the mission of your group is, and reach a level of agreement about what are acceptable tactics and what are not acceptable tactics. You probably won't get to consensus on that, but you can find like where the intersections are, that there's a critical mass of your group. You can find if there are areas where people may not agree, but they're not going to walk away because of it. And then the group is going to have to decide, if there's areas where we don't have agreement and people are saying they're going to walk away, do we let them or not? I think it's really important to have a very strong facilitator for a planning retreat like that, particularly when there are already levels of divisions. Really important to have a very well-planned and well-thought-through agenda for a meeting like that, and really important to come up with group-wide agreements for how you're going to go about the discourse at the outset of that. But I think, just in a very short nutshell, and we can talk about this more later if you want, that's how I would go about it.
I have another quick addition to that. I agree with everything you said. Something else, if you don't have maybe the ability to do something as formal as a retreat, is I would say maybe find a way for those people to work on different areas of the campaign. in a way where they don't need to maybe work with each other quite as much. I mean, if there's disagreements that are so crucial that it's causing big explosions, that's one thing. But like Deborah said, if you can get to a point where you basically, no one's gonna walk out, just find ways to minimize the need to bring up those issues. The business people maybe are gonna be good for doing accounting in the group, and the people that wanna do feisty protests can do the feisty protests. You know, maybe there's a way to find a way that people can work on their own strengths, and that way different working groups can have their own mini consensuses going on, and you don't need to have full consensus of every single 600 member in the group, because that might not be possible in that case.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Feliciano. I have the Mice and Rats Rights Advocacy Group in South Florida, only advocacy group for the rights of mice and rats in the world, and which we picked because, frankly, we feel like we need a win for the mice and rats. We hear agriculture, we hear chickens and cows and dogs are getting wins. Never hear a win for the mice and rats. So what I'm asking, we have an opinion about. We are ready to start a campaign, but the target is a little fuzzy. We have the choice of going after Harlan, which is a laboratory that supplies animals to HLS. So in the rat community, people actually support Harlan. They don't understand what's happening, but they support Harlan because they make rat food and they love their rat food. And you can make rat food in a grocery store, so whatever. But I'm thinking we can join forces with anti-HLS groups and help bring down Harlan, or focus on one of the biggest breeding facilities in the United States for mice and rats, because if we cripple them even a little bit, then that saves so many lives. But I'm not exactly sure which would be most effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that, you know, would require further research and, you know, a full environmental scan, like, you know, who would be on your side and who would be opposed to you in either case. You know, my gut says, particularly for a first campaign, you know, start where you can work with the Huntington folks, where you can